Competition brings out the best, and the Indianapolis Colts must take heed to succeed in 2025. So, who can the Colts bring in from free agency to make this happen? And which positions does Chris Ballard need to stiffen up the competitiveness? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast, brought to you by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. I'm Drake Wally, the deputy editor and of the channel, and also co-host of the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast. And joining me is my fellow co-host and fellow analyst, Noah Gebert. Before we jump into this, Noah, this is going to be a huge piece of the offseason is free agency, and Chris Ballard has not been a very good he's not been very good at getting those bigger names, those more impactful players, more of your Sam Womack waiver ads. So just right off the cuff, what do you expect? Do you think Chris Ballard is going to be a little more aggressive this time?
I think just based off of what we had to talk about last episode through his press conference, and he was giving all these hints and kind of saying that, yeah, that's what he was going to do is bring in more competition. We didn't get the commitment that some journalists asked for in the room, that he was going to sign multiple free agents. But he did talk about that and say that he has not done enough in the past. He's pretty much said his approach has been wrong the last 4 years with how stubborn he's been about bringing people in the building. He said the word new blood, and he wants to do more of that than what we got last year, which isn't hard to beat. I think every other team brought in more new blood than the Colts did. The Colts' biggest ad, you mentioned Sam Womack. That was a waiver wire claim after the offseason, or after training camp was over during the season. So that even when they bring in their biggest guy, it's just a waiver wire claim during the season. So, I mean, hopefully we get a little bit more action this year in free agency in the actual offseason. We kind of made our list of these guys. I feel like you take your pipe dream of what you kind of expect and want as a Colts fan, and then you take it down a notch, and that's kind of where Chris Ballard's going to land.
Yeah, and he's been pretty conservative in that regard. I know that obviously it takes two to tango. You got to have the guy that actually want to come to Indianapolis, a small market team, a team that hasn't really been to the playoffs in quite a while. But we're going to dive into this a little bit, and we're going to touch on how a lot of competition brought possible complacency into the locker room. Maybe it fostered a culture, let too many things happen on the field that didn't result in winning football. And then we'll also highlight how, hey, a guy like Alec Pierce is a perfect example that competition absolutely brings out the best. So the show will be free agents the Colts must consider for competition. But before we jump into that, we do have some comments here. Sean Conkright, thank you so much for joining. Truett, yet again, loyal listener. And then there's the one, the only, the third host of the Horseshoe Huddle podcast, as always, Stats Matt. So we thank all you guys for joining us here. But what me and Noah are going to do is we're going to touch on 4 positions that we feel like the Colts really need some competitiveness. You need to bring in additional talent to push some of these guys. One of the positions doesn't really have a guy that you're trying to push. Maybe it does, but it's more of just a lack of talent. So we're going to start off and kind of bounce back and forth, but we're going to start off here with the defensive side of the football. And we have a lot to cover here. So if we hurry through this, and we need to slow down for anybody, don't hesitate to let us know in the chat. We just have a lot of stuff to cover, but it is going to be the linebacker position. Now, before we dive into this and give our picks, we each have 2 for each position. Overall summary on the linebackers. What did you see? What was good? What was bad?
You came into the season thinking you were good there. Zaire Franklin coming into that new contract extension, which hasn't even kicked in yet. That doesn't kick in until next year. So you already were playing on the promise that he was going to be back and kind of be the guy. EJ Speed came on a little bit later last year when he was put into more of a prominent role in a starting role. So you came into this year expecting him to be kind of that, maybe a guy who could take a next step on the defense to kind of push it to the next level as a full-time starter for the entire season. You didn't really get that. He was there for the whole season. He was making plays sometimes, but the consistency just wasn't there. And overall, I feel like just like the strengths and weaknesses between Zaire and EJ Speed, your 2 starters, are so similar that they kind of made plays in the run game. But the pass game, they were both kind of liabilities there. So you were struggling to find options on third downs with your linebacker group. So kind of like a big picture approach. Maybe you need to kind of rethink the entire way you're constructing that linebacker room so you have kind of a more balanced approach on the defensive side of the ball back there.
Yeah, and what sticks out to me most is missed tackles, missed tackles,
Yep.
missed tackles,
Yeah.
missed
Yeah.
tackles. Just let ups in the coverage. We'll see. I think Jalen Carlisle has a bright future, but it will be up in the air if EJ Speed returns. But we're going to go ahead and just dive right into it. So my first selection that I think the Colts really need to go after is San Francisco 49er linebacker Dre Greenlaw. I know that this has been a big name that Colts fans have been clamoring for. All I've seen on X is Dre Greenlaw, Dre Greenlaw, Dre Greenlaw. Now, he did only play 2 games in 2024, but man, I'll go ahead and reference his 2023 120 tackles, 5 for loss, 4 passes defended, 1.5 sacks with the San Francisco 49ers. This is a guy that I think can bring a little bit of everything. I think that he can pass cover some, but it's really the surefire tackling. You're not going to get a lot of missed tackles with Dre Greenlaw, and he's really going to shore up that middle, especially if EJ Speed is not re-signed. I personally think Dre Greenlaw would be a nice addition. Noah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the pipe dream for Colts fans. He's clearly the biggest name at linebacker, kind of a well-rounded guy. Coming off that Achilles injury, you're kind of wondering if he's going to be that full guy, but he's got this whole offseason to rehab. So you'll kind of see kind of how he ends up being. But yeah, I think that's the big name. I think when he comes in, or if he were to come in, that would be kind of more of a replacement for Zaire Franklin. Maybe not a replacement, but kind of shift Zaire Franklin into a new role, maybe as that Sam linebacker. Just because I think he's kind of been that guy in the middle, him and Fred Warner. I think they played off of each other, but Fred Warner's more of that pass coverage guy, and the Colts don't really have that on the roster at this point.
Absolutely. Now, Noah, you've got one that I absolutely love here, and I'm just going to let you go ahead and unfold your first pick for a solid free agent addition the Colts could use.
Yeah, so I threw out the name Ernest Jones. This would be a unique situation with him hitting free agency. It's kind of up in the air with him in Seattle right now. But he was a team captain on the Rams, played there for his first three years of his rookie deal, traded to the Titans in the middle of the season last year, traded to the Seahawks. So you're kind of wondering, did the Seahawks really give up Jerome Baker and a fourth or a fifth or whatever pick they gave up for him for a half-year rental of a starting linebacker? So you would think they're trying to bring him back, but word is that the contract talks have paused. So I mean, it's a possibility. I think this is another guy that comes in and is kind of more of that Zaire Franklin competition, less so than EJ Speed. I think he's going to be another guy that's really strong in the run game and not so much in the pass game, where he could have some holes in that part of his game, but maybe could be a overall well-rounded guy.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the metrics here. I mean, this was a dude that absolutely tore it up this season. I mean, he had
Yeah.
it looks like he had 138 tackles, 4 for loss. He had a fumble forced. He had 4 passes defended. He had an interception. I mean, this was with 2 separate teams. So I mean, Ernest Jones would be a hell of an addition.
And former team captain. I don't know what's really been the situation with him, where he's been traded in the middle of the season by a team that just acquired him in the offseason. Maybe there's something behind the scenes there. Maybe there's not. But yeah, a guy who's been a former team captain maybe kind of brings that leadership you're looking for, maybe trying to revamp on this team.
Yeah, and I do have to highlight a comment here from Wyatt Law, loyal, longtime listener. Wyatt, thank you so much. Carlisle's being hurt most of the year didn't help the linebacker group. Look, that is absolute fact, because Jalen Carlisle was playing fantastic football. I mean, he started to hit his stride right before he got injured. I know, Noah, I know that when he was selected, I was super excited, because you're talking about a guy who tackle, used to play safety, covers like a blanket, and probably has the highest upside of any Colts linebacker on the roster.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys on the team that kind of fills the need of being a passing down kind of linebacker that nobody else on the roster really takes that role. You didn't get what you wanted out of Zaire Franklin in the middle, or EJ Speed. I don't think has ever really been that guy in his career. So you hope that Jalen Carlisle can develop into that every down linebacker for you.
Yes. So now to my second linebacker. This one's a little bit of a lesser known name, but I'm going with him because of the youth. I'm going with him because I think that there's a lot of talent there, and the defense of this team wasn't really that impressive outside of a man named Trey Hendrickson, and that's Akeem Davis-Gaither from the Cincinnati Bengals. 82 tackles, 4 for loss. He had 4 passes defended on the season. He had a fumble recovered, a fumble forced, an interception. I just think that would be that'd be choosing the upside. That'd be choosing a guy that I know that EJ Speed is approaching 30, and I think you've gotten
Yeah.
what you've gotten with EJ Speed. So I think that having Akeem Davis Gaither, I think it would be cheaper than Dre Greenlaw. I think that also it would be, you probably could get about 4 or 5 years out of the guy if he ends up working out. But
Mhm.
I think that that's somebody I'd go with if for no other reason. And you do let go of EJ Speed. He's probably going to push a guy like Zaire Franklin. He's probably going
Yeah.
to push a guy like Jalen Carlies, even though he's going into year 2 only. Jalen Carlies is. He's still going to bring the best out of both those guys because he's an all-around football player at linebacker.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. Yeah, I like that. I like kind of where you're going with that in terms of an EJ Speed replacement, because I've sort of been approaching this offseason with the understanding that, or the assumption that he's not going to be back next year. Just with kind of how Chris Ballard talked about the roster and where the weaknesses were, saying the D line actually played pretty good, but there were a ton of missed tackles and they weren't very efficient in the run game. Kind of points to maybe there's some disappointment there in the linebacker room. And when you're going to bring back guys, a guy whose contract's expiring, he's approaching 30, just seems like one of the obvious guys to kind of let move on, just kind of go in a different direction. So my second pick at linebacker is a guy that could kind of fill that weak side role, and kind of be maybe he is kind of direct competition for Carlisle. I think kind of the way that the Colts have operated in the past is they've got these young guys they drafted late who kind of showed something. Then they go into next year kind of being that unquestioned starter, and they don't get that competition that we've been talking about. I think that would be a mistake with Carlisle. I think he could develop into that guy. But if you want to push him like you did with Alec Pierce, like you said in the intro, for example, I think you get somebody with a similar skill set who can be a starter. That way, Carlisle is just he's that pressure is on him to perform, or he can be replaced, and you have a viable option on the roster. So I picked Tyrell Dodson, who was waived by Seattle
Nice.
after starting 9 games, and then claimed by Miami. Played for the Dolphins this year, and really started most of the games for I think all 3 games for the Dolphins after that. So he was a starter on 2 teams last year, which is I guess a theme for Ernest Jones, my other linebacker pick, who was also on the Seahawks. Yeah, so I guess this is more like your pass coverage guy, and less your run stopping guy, which I think you already have. I think I'm also operating under the assumption that Zaire Franklin will be on the roster. I know Colts fans are hit or miss whether they want to see him back or whatever, but I think just with his contract extension kicking in, just kind of the status that he has on the team, unless he was the guy that gave that anonymous quote, and Chris Ballard knows about it, then I think he's coming back. So I think that getting a guy to complement him and to push Carlisle would be a good option here.
Yeah, and I really like that pick because it's a guy who is still I think that he's veteran enough that he's going to bring plenty of experience to the position. He's played with enough starting experience that he's also played at a high level. And I think that he's going to bring some stability and competition, because you're going to hear that word a lot, people. Like, competition is one of the biggest things the Colts didn't do with this roster. So absolutely, if they don't do it again, get ready for more complacency and potentially more drama. But I actually wanted to highlight a comment here from the one and only CFO of the show, Patrick Rye. So what about drafting a linebacker fairly high, but also bringing a veteran leader that is actually a leader, unlike Franklin? That guy is Bobby Wagner. Yeah. While we have this up, that was somebody I considered putting on this list, but he's in his mid-30s. I think that he does have a ring, right? If I'm not mistaken, he might have a couple at this point. He's played so damn long. But do you think that would be a viable signing? Do you even think that Wagner would be interested? And if he were to come here, I mean, he still plays at a high level.
Yeah.
What kind of impact do you think he might be able to have on this? This unit?
Hard to say if he'd still be interested. I really have no way of knowing that, but B-Wags, yeah, that's Zaire Franklin's mentor, and they've made that very open about their professional working relationship and how Wagner kind of took Zaire Franklin under his wing. I think maybe that'd be a good signing for Franklin, to have your mentor come play alongside you. I know he's his good buddy in EJ Speed. If we're thinking that he's moving on, then maybe we get another guy to hold him a little bit more accountable, instead of kind of. I'm not going to really speak to their personalities that much, those two together. And how that may have impacted their play on the field, because I'm not really in the know on that. But maybe having a guy, more veteran leader, his mentor, along there beside him, kind of watching him every step of the way in practice, I think that could be a big move to get the most out of a linebacker who you've already committed big money to.
Yeah, and the linebacker position, it's going to be massive. It's a huge one because we saw so many again missed tackles, and then you had Carlisle get hurt. Cameron McGrone was also hurt most of the season, so really you were relying on Grant Stewart also to come in there. And now
Yeah.
I think he had the most tackles of any Colts player in a single game this year.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you got to get more reliable talent there. So, but next is my favorite position to talk about outside of quarterback.
I think it was this past year too, right?
Yeah, because the Colts have done nothing,
Yeah.
nothing. So, but yes, tight end. So this one's interesting. We were talking about some of these other positions. We referenced Alec Pierce. These guys aren't doing enough. You got to push them. You got to push them. But at the end of the day, this one is more about the lack of talent. And Jelani Woods, the question mark, because when he does inevitably return, that's the guy you need to push. That's the guy you need to make sure is actually going to do something with this incredible talent that he's got in athletic ability. But in this case, we're going to reverse it. So Noah, I want you to go ahead and start. I think we have 4 winners here personally. I think each one of these guys plays a role on this team. So go ahead and roll it out, my friend.
You threw down your predictions first, and one of them was definitely a guy that I was going to put on my list, so I had to go searching for another one. I like all 4 that we came up with here. Also, before I even get into my pick, you mentioned the inevitable return of Jelani Woods, which I think is generous. We don't know that's inevitable that he's returning.
That's true.
So I'm also the same way. I'm operating under several other assumptions going into this offseason. I'm assuming Jelani Woods is a camp body until he shows he can stay on the field and do otherwise. So I'm making no decisions on the tight end room based on what we think he might be. But my first guy, veteran guy, I think all of our guys actually are pretty big veteran guys here. 35 years old coming into next year, Zach Ertz. Who had some big years with the Eagles. 2021 was with Shane Steichen as his offensive coordinator, so he's got that familiarity there. I know Ballard talked about a guy who can do both things in the run and the pass game as a blocker and a receiver. I don't think Ertz has necessarily been a good blocker his entire career, but maybe you just kind of take that stability as a veteran leader who's had familiarity with Steichen, who's produced consistently as a receiving threat. What was it? 66 receptions, 654 yards, 7 touchdowns last season in his age 34 season with the Commanders.
It's impressive.
I think that's more than the tight end room combined in terms of yards and touchdowns by Colts last year. So obviously you're getting an upgrade there. I don't know what the cost is going to be for a 35-year-old tight end. Probably not that extravagant, but he did have a big season production-wise this year. But yeah, I think maybe that's a guy that Steichen would want to have back to have some stability there at the position.
Yeah, and I actually like Marcus Roberts says that that they feel like that's a good call. Stats Matt says if you're going tight end, it has to be an Ertz, a Conklin, or a Juwan Johnson. Now Conklin was with the Jets, Juwan Johnson was with the Saints, but all 3 of those guys, a lot of tight ends would work for the Colts, if for no other reason, because the Colts tight end room was buns this season. All right, Mo Alley-Cox was the most effective guy, and he was a blocker primarily, and Kylan Granson couldn't secure any of his targets hardly. So,
and neither are under contract anymore. So
exactly, I would fully expect Mo Alley-Cox to return, but Kylan Granson absolutely not. So, and then of course I got to highlight one more. Ertz won Stats Matters championship. So there you go.
7 tuds will do it. Yeah,
7 tuds will do it. So my first one here is it's not an exciting one at all, and only caught 8 passes for 73 receiving yards with the LA Chargers, but at one point was a viable option, and that's Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst is interesting because he can block some, but he's still going to be more of your receiving threat. He's had an okay up and down career. You've had some 50 catch seasons, some like 40 catch seasons here and there. But I like Hayden Hurst because he's probably chomping at the bit to get back to at least 30 catches, 40 catches. And I think if you bring him onto a team like the Colts, where you just haven't had tight end production these past few years, and you are missing Jelani Woods entirely, I feel like that's a veteran option and a guy that might provide a nice safety blanket for a quarterback. He's not going to blow you away, but a guy like Anthony Richardson, for the love of God, he really could have used those tight ends in 2024.
Yeah, I like Hurst. I think of the guys, we're getting pretty up there in age. I think Hurst will be 31, whatever. At one point, though, was pretty explosive. I think of the four that we've picked out, I think he has the most opportunity to be able to stretch the field a little bit vertically, which Steichen has loved doing, especially with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. So maybe you're given a more reliable target vertically down the middle of the field for Richardson.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now I got to pass it on to you. Who is your second tight end here? Because I'm really excited for both of our second ones here, and I think somebody actually mentioned yours in the chat.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so mine is Mike Gesicki, who had similar production in terms of receptions, yards as Zach Ertz, but only 2 touchdowns this year with the Bengals. Just another option that's kind of more of a receiving guy, a receiving threat than a blocker. It's going to be kind of difficult to find your ideal fit here in free agency in terms of can do everything every down tight end. But I think there are plenty of options if you're looking for viable pass catchers who you can bring into the room and supplement a room that really had no production this past season. I think pretty much anybody that we're going to throw out here, these names are going to be upgrades in terms of the passing game. I don't think he had a bad year blocking this season, but I think historically Gesicki has been a pretty below average or average blocker. But in the receiving game has proven that he can be explosive as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got your blocking tight ends and Drew Ogletree and Mo Alley Cox if you retain him. You've got the blockers right there. And Gesicki is, 65%. I know he had Burrow. I know that Joe Burrow had an MVP-like season without making the playoffs. But man, 65 out of 83 targets were secured. That is 78.3%. That is fantastic. Now, I know that he kind of had some up and down seasons there in Miami, but I have always been a fan of Mike Gesicki because I do think that he, kind of like Hayden Hurst, maybe more so, less of a blocker, but this is a dude that's going to get open. He's going to run some really good routes, not much of a red zone guy, but he's going to gobble up the middle of the field. Okay, and I think the red zone is more for those big tight ends that the Colts have. Guys like Mo, guys that'll probably 1 out of 4 of their catches will be a touchdown, right? They'll have 13 catches for 3, and 3 of them will be touchdowns. But I absolutely love that one. We got to highlight this comment here. Darth, absolutely. Okay, that would be a fantastic draft pick, but even if they take Tyler Warren, they should still sign a tight end. I really think they should still sign a tight end. You can't have Mo Alley Cox, Will Mallory, who knows what his future is. Jelani Woods is a question mark, and Drew Ogletree is not going to compete with a guy like Tyler Warren. If you bring Tyler Warren in, no competition, he's the undisputed starter. I say a guy like Gesicki, that'd be awesome. What are your thoughts? I know that everyone's talking about Tyler Warren, but do you still think that if he's drafted, they should bring in competition? Because I personally think they should.
I do. I think essentially there's 2 starting tight end spots up for grabs. In the Y tight end, that's going to be more in line that can block. That would be your Mo Alley Cox if you retain him. But right now he's not on the roster, so that'd be Drew Ogletree. I don't know if you want to go into the season banking on him being the starter just based on what we saw last season. And then you've got your kind of H tight end who's going to be your more receiving threat, your Kylan Granson, Will Mallory. Kylan Granson's not under contract, and again, Will Mallory I don't think has proven enough to go into the season as a starter. So I think really you're looking to add at both of those spots. I think Tyler Warren, you could really play him at either. I don't think it really matters. I guess you just kind of pick your flavor afterwards. I guess free agency would come beforehand. So you kind of get what's on the market, which it seems to be more receiving threats. And then Tyler Warren would kind of be your wide tight end guy who you can kind of move all over the place.
Yeah, and look, man, Tyler Warren would be a hell of a pick. But yes, I think that going back to what we've been talking about, you can't just let a guy come in as a rookie without having somebody compete with him that's done it, seen it, and been on the field plenty. We see some signed Gesicki. We see some Tyler Conklins. We see Colston Loveland. That's another pick. Warren and Loveland, big names to watch in the draft. But to close out the tight ends here, I'm going with a guy that I used to love in Atlanta. I really thought that he was a hell of a football player in Atlanta. And then he's just been bouncing around from Cleveland to Tennessee to Las Vegas to New England. And he has not dropped below he had a rough year with the Raiders, but he hasn't really dropped below about 38, 40 catches. And that's Austin Hooper. I think that Austin Hooper, 45 catches, 476 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns with the Patriots. That's while sharing snaps with Hunter Henry, who is a superior tight end. And also, don't forget, Drake May had no one else to throw to except Demario Douglas. Okay. This was an awful football team he was on. By the way, they almost beat the Colts, but he made the Colts pay in that game. Austin Hooper is a guy that can also, Patrick, you're an absolute menace in that chat right now. But Austin Hooper is absolutely a guy that can block. Okay, he's probably more of your pass catcher, but
Yep.
he can probably block better than any one of these guys that we're
Yeah.
naming. And I do think that he's the most consistent guy right now because Zach Ertz is the guy, right, overall. But like this is the most consistent guy right now that I think that you could bring in. And who knows, he might be your tight end too right away if you do so draft a tight end like Warren or Loveland. That's probably going to be your tight end too. And he also has an ability to catch touchdowns, which is something that we really haven't seen outside or from these tight ends for the Colts outside of Mo Alley Cox. So in short, I know that he's bounced around the NFL for the past couple of years, but what are your thoughts on Austin Hooper? Do you think that maybe he's about to hit that decline? He has been in the league since 2016.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to be pretty close to that decline. You never know when it's coming. But I think he showed enough last year to show that it's worth taking a shot on, that he could still be that guy. He was the guy that I was mentioning when we got into this position that I was going to throw him on my list, and I saw you had him. Where I think he's the most well-rounded target that you could go after here in free agency, to kind of give you that versatility to play in every package. So yeah, I think he would be my number one pick there.
Yeah, and we got to highlight this a lot like Jack Doyle. I mean, I would personally take a prime Jack Doyle over Austin Hooper, but hey, if they can get anything close to a tight end like Jack Doyle, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I can promise you that. So now we're going to flip over to a position that Ballard even mentioned in his press conference lacked. And you also saw, you saw highs, you saw lows, but this was just a position where Ballard was like, you know what? We're good. We have everything we need here. And all that we were talking about all offseason, Noah, was it just takes one injury. It just takes one injury with this position group, and you basically fall off a cliff. And that's the cornerbacks. So, in short, because I know that one of your favorite players, one of the guys that you really like to watch tape on, Jalen Jones, is in this position room. But overall, what was your feel on this group? Do you think that they overperformed, underperformed, performed about as well as you thought they would? What are your thoughts?
I think they overperformed, considering that Dallas Flowers, you were banking on him to be a starter on the outside. He turned out to be nothing, and you still kind of salvaged that with a waiver claim and Sam Womack. You kept yourself afloat. I think Ballard deserved to do some victory laps at his press conference. He didn't take the opportunity because he was getting beaten down, but I think he deserved to do some victory laps with how he kind of banked on his young secondary, and they pulled through for the most part. I don't think it was a great group, but I think it wasn't the disaster that everybody was thinking it was going to be. I think they were definitely done some favors by the scheme that Gus Bradley was playing, and it's going to be hard to predict who the Colts should be bringing in until we know what the defensive scheme is even going to be on the other side. But really, if you want to be able to do anything more than the conservative approach that Gus Bradley employed, then you need some more talent on the outside. Jalen Jones is going to be an average starter for you. I think that's okay. Sam Womack was an average starter last year, but the thing that I've always thought about cornerbacks is that the play is so volatile. They could be an average starter one year and they could fall off the cliff week 2 of the next season. They could break out and then go straight back down to earth after a few games. I think it's important to have bodies there who have been consistent and show capability to step in and start. And after Jalen Jones and Sam Womack, I don't think you have that.
No, that's fair. I mean, that's a very fair assessment. So for my first one, this is a guy I thought they should have signed last year. That's Rasul Douglas from the Bills. He's not out of this world. He's not a guy that's going to he's not going to blow your mind defensively, but I mean, he has 80 starts in his career. He has 120 games played. The guy has 3 interception returns for touchdowns. So when this man takes the football away, there's a really good shot if you don't get him to the ground, he is going to take it to the house. Okay, so it's a guy that can force turnovers. It's a guy that can tackle. I do feel like the cornerbacks for the most part actually were okay, tackling. But 58 tackles, 5 for loss, 5 passes defended, a fumble forced for the Bills. This was a defense that helped Josh Allen and company get to the playoffs. I think this would be a great veteran signing. I think that in this case, we're trying to push Juju Brents, people. Okay, Now I know that Jalen Jones, you got to push him. He's a 7th round pick. But man, dude, Juju Brents has played almost no games out of 34. I think he's played 10 or 11 out of 34 games, that's just not going to cut it. When he returns, you got to tell him, hey, guess what? Here's a veteran who's done it. Now show us that you're better than that veteran.
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, I think kind of these guys that we're bringing in are going to be on the same level. Uh, but that level that I'm kind of expecting is like borderline pushing for a starting role opposite Jalen Jones, where they're pushing Jalen Jones, they're pushing Sam Womack, they're pushing Juju Brents. I think you should go into the season with the expectation that Juju Brents is corner four and hope that he turns into
Ooh.
more.
Mm.
I think he has the potential to be way more than that, but you can't rely on him being more than that in your offseason plans, or you might end up burnt like you did this past season. So yeah, I think Douglas is definitely one of those guys. Most of these guys, veterans who's have plenty of starting experience that you can put out there.
Yeah, and so that will actually lead us right into your first cornerback, which I do have to say, let me pull it up here. Yeah, so this one is a name that I don't think a lot of people are going to say, oh, that was on my bingo card for the Colts to
Yeah.
potentially sign as a cornerback, but this is a solid one. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a former first round pick. I think it's worth kicking the tires on. I don't even know how much it's kicking the tires because he started 15 games, all 15 games that he played for the Falcons last year. And that's Mike Hughes, who didn't have a ton of ball production for playing 15 games, but was solid as a starter out there. Had a really good PFF coverage grade, if you're taking that into any consideration. But yeah, maybe not the tallest guy. I think he's 5'10", 190, so maybe he doesn't have those measurables that you're looking for, or Chris Ballard has typically looked for in an outside corner. But Sam Womack didn't have those either. So maybe it depends on what the defensive coordinator is going to be looking for that they bring in. But he could be a guy that does fit a scheme that a new coordinator comes in, and he can stabilize the position.
I like that pick a lot because you're bringing in again, it's starting experience. You're not bringing in
Yep.
some guy that's like had 1, 2, 3 starts. He's always been this backup. He's always been a depth piece. No, no, no. Mike Hughes was playing opposite AJ Terrell. Okay,
Yep.
so you're talking about a guy who was trusted to help that defense on the other half of the football field. So I love that pick. I think that's one that the Colts could actually say, you know what, you want competition.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a guy that I think would be a higher level signing than some believe. Before I get to mine, let's go ahead and jump into the chat here for just a moment. So we've got Carlton Davis the third from the Lions. That'd be an interesting one. For some reason I can't even really stress why. It just doesn't seem like somebody that Ballard would go after. Who knows? Because his seat is as hot as it's ever been. It might even have burst into flames a little bit at this point. So that's somebody. I will say Charvarius Ward. Boy, if you can get Charvarius Ward, that's huge. That's a hell of a football player. Byron Murphy, but if not, I'll take a Kello Witherspoon or DJ Reed from the Jets. Truett Trussler's on the Witherspoon train. Carlton Davis, Brandon Stevens. We got a lot of good ones in there in the chat. But for me, it is a Kello Witherspoon, and this is a guy that, just like Rasul Douglas, I thought the Colts should have signed him last year because he was coming off of, no joke, in 2023, 17 games started for the LA Rams. He had 2 fumble recoveries. He had 52 tackles, career high. He had 3 interceptions. Now, obviously, this season he played 4 less games, had 5 starts, had a pick. He had 31 tackles. But Witherspoon has 62 starts. He's got 90 total games played. The guy is he's only 29 years old now. Obviously, by the time the season starts, he'll be 30. But I think this is a guy that could bring he could bring either starter level talent, or he could be a very good move piece, depth piece that could be put in certain situations to succeed, whoever the new defensive coordinator is. I've always been a fan of Ahkello Witherspoon. I like his range. I like his play style. And I just think that it would really be nice to have a guy like that to push, your youngsters like Juju Brents and Jalen Jones.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a guy, I think if you bring him, you slot him into one of your starting outside corner spots at the beginning of training camp and let him duke it out and see if he comes away with it, which I think he has the talent to do. I'd be a big fan of that signing also. I've got one more also who has pretty much exclusively played on the outside and has a lot of starting experience. Didn't start. I think he started three games last year. It looks like for the Vikings. But he's going to be a big name too. If only for the storylines that happened in the draft. But he's a former 3rd round pick for the Seahawks, and that's Shaquille Griffin. you're talking about a defensive back group or a corner group that doesn't really have the long speed to defend deep passes. And I think you bring Shaquille Griffin in, and he's got that 4.3 speed, 4.35, 4.38, whatever he ran. But it's going to be far and away above what everybody else in the DB room is running for the Colts. So again, this is going to be like the Mike Hughes pick. I think he has the measurables that Chris Ballard has looked for. But when you bring in a defensive coordinator, depending on their scheme, you may put a little bit more weight on a corner that has that long speed and can defend down the field a little bit more reliably. And I think if that's the case, then Griffin could be one of those guys there.
Griffin was a name that a lot of fans thought
Yep.
he'd be wearing a Colts jersey last year. They really did. I did. I really did. I thought that, after you're like, Ballard, what the hell are you doing? You're not getting any of these defensive backs. That was one of the last ones I felt like, hey, that is a guy that can bring us a nice, stable floor. And I like the way that you brought up his speed, because even in the Denver Broncos game, you get 3 turnovers. You force Bo Nix to throw 3 interceptions, but then Sam Womack gets absolutely cooked. He just gets absolutely fried deep by Cortland Sutton in that game. And you saw a couple different times. Now, obviously, due to Gus Bradley's defensive scheme, you weren't letting up massive deep shots. Yeah. But you want to have a guy that if you're dealing with a burner, or a guy like, for the love of God, Xavier Worthy, guy like that, you want to be able to have a guy that can at least bump him at the line of scrimmage right off of the route and keep up with him in a foot race. And like you said, man, as good as some of these corners are for the Colts, like Kenny Moore, not really a guy known for foot speed to run with a speedster, on an offense. So just because it's such a crucial position, out of these 4, which one sticks out to you the most, Noah? I'm curious.
Well, I have to pick one of my guys, right? I guess not for tight end. I would have picked Hooper. That was yours.
There you go.
I'd go with Mike Hughes. I think it's okay to break the mold there at corner, and kind of go with somebody that a body type that you wouldn't normally project as a starter, just to get some stability there. I don't think, no matter what you're doing, really in free agency, you're not going to get a star on the outside unless you're paying $20 million a year for a corner. And I don't think the Colts are in a position to do that, because they have so many other areas to address. I don't think you can go all out there. So I'd pick Mike Hughes just to get that starting experience, and kind of level out the back end of the defense.
I think that's probably the highest level pick out of all 4 of these. That's the one with the most upside. That's the one that's going to have the biggest day one impact right when his cleats hit the field. That's going to be a guy that you're probably going to be like, he might even start over some of the guys that we're starting for the Colts. So the reason that we flew through some of these, obviously we've got news and rumors at the end, but man, we got our next position, which is probably the most important, even though you're not talking about the guy starting potentially, right? Unless something happens. And of course, that is Mr. Anthony Richardson and the quarterbacks. Okay. Joe Flacco, probably not going to be retained. All right. Sam Ehlinger, Colts fans, not the people in the chat. I feel like the people in the chat understand, but Colts fans, Sam Ehlinger is not a starting quarterback. Okay. He's had his chance.
He was.
He was at one point. He was.
Shouldn't have been, but he was.
Yeah, and it led to Frank Reich's firing. So, they need somebody. They need somebody that's hungry enough. I'm not saying Joe Flacco wasn't, but when you're in the league almost, 15, 16 years, you've won a Super Bowl, you've got your Super Bowl MVP, you've had a lot of success, and you've been paid out the wazoo for your services. I find it hard to believe that Joe Flacco was motivated outside of anything other than collecting a paycheck. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's my thing. I thought Gardner Minshew was a far better backup for Anthony Richardson to push that kid in his rookie season. But we're going to let Noah start off with one. I'm so excited to list these off, because everyone's had a different quarterback that they feel like should be brought in behind Richardson. Everyone from Sam Darnold to Justin Fields to just so many names. So please go ahead and kick us off with the quarterbacks.
Yeah, you said it was the most fun. I kind of would argue, or maybe you didn't say the most fun, but you said it was the most exciting. Talking about quarterback, most important. I would argue the position itself, yes, it's fun. The idea of getting somebody good is really fun, but then you take a look at the list of names that are available, and you're like, wow, this is not nearly as fun as I thought this was going to be. So I just went through a couple of guys. I'll start with my first one, who's my Madden quarterback, and that's Trey Lance, just because he's got all those measurables. He's got the arm strength. He's got the speed. I think former 3rd overall pick, so you're maybe taking a chance on a guy, maybe having a resurgence on what his third team. I think you're batting, you're got a pretty low percentage chance of this working out. Um, but I think you're taking a shot just desperately to try to hope something happens. If you're saying like legitimately that you want competition for Anthony Richardson, you have to take a big swing on the backup like you did with Anthony Richardson, because it's hard to find somebody in free agency who's gonna legitimately like be a proven starter that can actually push a guy like that. So you're just kind of keeping some or getting somebody that can compete with him athletically, make some of those wow plays in practice like Anthony Richardson is making. So you're kind of taking a step back every time Trey Lance makes a throw. Maybe Anthony Richardson's like, oh, well, watch this. So you're kind of hoping for that. I think this is more of a 2% chance you get lucky and he's the guy for the future. 98% chance that doesn't work out. But what you're hoping for is this is a good shot to motivate Anthony Richardson and show that he needs to do more.
Yes, and look, man, you can push Richardson with a veteran. All right,
Yep.
you can, but this ain't pushing Richardson with a veteran. This is bringing in a kid that has not been able to stay healthy and had his entire trajectory just
Yep.
thrown off to the wayside. I love this. I do. I think that if you brought in a guy like Trey Lance, he's probably not going to beat Richardson out of the position. But you also don't know, because kind of like with what he said, with what Noah mentioned about Jelani Woods, I know that Richardson's been on the field more, but you have no idea what you're going to see in year three. I don't know. I mean, he went from 60% or like 55% or something like that to under 50% completion with more
Yep.
games played and more injuries in tow. So I think that you can't just say, well, let's get a guy that's going to teach Anthony. Let's get a guy that's going to, sit behind Anthony and he's going to have all this experience. No, no, no. Because if you do have him get hurt, you don't want your offense to miss too many beats, and you want to have a guy that isn't just stale in the pocket and doesn't just stand there and take hits and
Yep.
isn't just a pocket passer. Okay, so I think that that's a good one. I Before I get to mine, we have so many people just absolutely lighting it up in the chat.
Quarterback does it. Yeah.
Yeah, witness the Gohan says Sam Ellinger is bad. I mean,
Harsh but fair.
it's harsh, but yes, I mean he is a QB3. Um, okay, so we've got Bruce Brazel says Sam Darnold, get ready for a whole lot of dough, and he probably would want to start. So we'll see. Stats Matt says Fields isn't happening on Daniel Jones or Zach Wilson, and then Darth Raider says Fields, Hooker, or Milton. We need one playbook. Now that's interesting, because then Steichen wouldn't have to tailor a game plan to his second quarterback. So for me, I went the route of exciting. I went the route of a guy that literally had a quote that said, "The horse is ready for battle." And I think that he said, "Glory comes from the Lord." All right. He said, "Lord, please deliver me from these pick sixes." All right. So, Jameis Winston, baby. I think that is. I just think that's a rah signing. That's a guy that's going to never let Richardson off the hook. He will push Richardson. I don't think you'll ever have to question if Richardson's working hard enough with a guy like Jameis Winston on the roster. He had 2,121 passing yards on 181 completions, 13 interceptions, but it's not Jameis Winston unless there's almost as many picks. And he had 12 interceptions with the Browns. I love Jameis Winston. I think that he's put together a fantastic backup level career. What's your opinion on this one? I think that he probably won't happen, because you're probably looking at Richardson like, okay, you're better than this guy. Like, you can handle this starting position over Jameis Winston. But if he were to go down, you're getting a pretty high level backup here. So what are your thoughts on the former number one overall pick?
Yeah, I like that this is where mine was Trey Lance, and if Richardson goes down, you're kind of like, oh, it's Trey Lance now. That and you're a little worried about that. But if Richardson goes down, it's Jameis Winston. The ship's a little bit steadier, but still not like that staleness that Joe Flacco brought. You're not. I mean, Winston's not a rushing threat. He'll just gut out some rushes with his heart, and not because he's entirely mobile or athletic or anything like that. He'd be a fun pick. He would be fun. It'd be fun to tune in to watch the Colts play. Whereas last season, when Richardson was off the field, it was just not fun to watch.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, man, Jameis Winston would bring a nice floor. He'd bring a stable floor. so you would get like a game, let's say that he plays 3 games. You'd get a game where he throws 3 tuds, no picks, probably airs it out for 300 passing yards, and you win big. You win like by 2 scores. Then he's going to go out there against a defense that's lesser than what you just beat, and he'll throw you 4 interceptions, and he'll hover around 50%. You talk about the ultimate boom or bust quarterback. He can either make your fantasy championship, make your fantasy season, win you some games, or make you look like the biggest dud in your league. So trust me, I know. But so the other one you have here, this one is huge because ever since he departed from the team that really made him a household name and paid him way too much money, probably one of the most hilariously undeserved contracts in NFL history outside of Deshaun Watson. This one is really interesting because this is a player that I think really wants to show that he can still play, and he might be able to have a Sam Darnold like resurgence. But please give us your second quarterback. This one's a good one.
Yeah, I think just looking through the list, I don't think Sam Darnold's a possibility.
No,
maybe not. I think it's a long shot. I think this is the only other guy there that you're like bringing him in, and then like there's a legitimate battle for the position of QB1 when you go into training camp, and that's Daniel Jones. I don't think anybody would be happy if Daniel Jones ended up being the QB1. That just means Anthony Richardson failed. But I think he's the only guy that you go into it, and Richardson's like, oh, okay, that means something. Jameis Winston, I think if he comes in, he's a backup. Trey Lance has been a third string guy. Daniel Jones has been a starter. He got benched, but Anthony Richardson did too, right? And the Colts aren't afraid to make that move. It seemed like that one thing that shows me for next year is I don't think they're against somebody beating out Anthony Richardson. So if they can bring somebody to do it, I think Daniel Jones might be the only guy within their budget that could.
Yeah, and Daniel Jones, he still has ability, right? I know that he really struggled in New York, and he was pretty rough, at times. But they also did not have, especially after Evan Ingram, they didn't really have much of a tight end. Darren Waller was he just didn't really work out. And then, you had Darius Slayton, you had Wan'Dale Robinson, you had some guys that just really weren't your high level guys. But Daniel Jones also deservedly, probably is a backup. I think that he's a high level backup. But hey, that's what you would sign this dude to be, is to push Anthony Richardson. And you're hoping Daniel Jones doesn't have to start. Yeah, that's really what you're hoping. But yeah, so just to kind of put a bow on this, because we have gone 46 minutes and we have not even gotten to the Colts news and rumors, and we have like 6 or 7 things here. So mine is one that I don't think will happen, because I think the team that has him will retain him, because the veteran that is in front of him probably has his days numbered, and that's Justin Fields. I think that if you were to sign Justin Fields, you are telling Anthony Richardson, you better make it pan out, because Justin Fields he is just one right team away from unlocking what he can do. Yeah. I really think that he still has the ability. He had 1,106 passing yards on 106 completions, which tells me Mike Tomlin was having him throw easy passes. He was trying to make the offense as easy on Justin Fields as possible and utilizing his legs, because the guy also had 289 rushing yards on 62 attempts for 5 rushing scores, along with his 5 passing touchdowns, 10 total all-purpose touchdowns, only 1 interception. I was impressed with how he played against the Colts. He almost let it come back. The Steelers, kind of like Patrick mentions here, they're probably going to roll with Justin Fields. I would be shocked, absolutely blown away, if they either continued with Russ or let Fields go, because he's going to have a nice market out there, So what are your thoughts on this one? It's probably incredibly unrealistic, Noah, but I do think it would be the one that really gives Anthony Richardson, you're putting him to the task if you bring in a guy like Justin Fields, because he can match his athleticism to a degree. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the most exciting of the 4, that the signing would kind of turn a little bit more heads in Indy. If you did that, I think kind of what I mentioned with Trey Lance, where you've got this guy that's athletic and make those powerful throws. I think Justin Fields is a little bit closer to Anthony Richardson, looking in the mirror and being like, oh, I think, that's kind of that Spider-Man meme, just the two of them pointing at each other back and forth. Because I think they're going to bring the exact same things to an offense. I think bringing in Justin Fields and having him be that QB2, if you have to turn to him, I think the ceiling's the exact same on the passing game, and the ceiling's the exact same on the rushing game. I think
Hmm.
it doesn't really change much. You just kind of are bouncing back and forth between who you trust more and who you think can get the most efficient use out of what would essentially be the exact same playbook for the both of them.
Yeah, the thing is, I think that regardless who they bring in at quarterback, they need to sign a quarterback. Don't draft a quarterback. I
Yeah.
don't think like I know I've heard about Joe Milton. All right, you've heard about you draft a guy, you bring in a guy. That is going to tell Anthony Richardson basically like I'm not saying you can't have a diamond in the rough, right? But like I mean, the Brock Purdy's of the world, the Tom Brady's of the world, it's really really difficult to find those. And I think that you're telling Richardson, hey, you're the starter, this guy's here to back you up and learn from you as he grows as a young quarterback. You bring in a veteran, you bring in a guy that's a youngster but still has experience, like a Justin Fields, like a Daniel Jones. That's telling Anthony Richardson, hey bud, you got to do something, because even though you're 22 years old, you're walking into year 3, and year 3 you're supposed to have had it figured out, at least to
Yep.
some degree. And Richardson could not be farther from figuring it out right now. You were under 50% completion. You had 12 interceptions thrown. You had 9 fumbles. Yes, 9 fumbles, 21 total gaffes and faux pas during the season, as opposed to 8 touchdown passes. I mean, so there's a lot to work on for Anthony Richardson. But we'll kind of put a bow on this right now. And before we get to the Colts news and rumors, because there is some crazy stuff that there's good stuff and a lot of moves and a lot of happenings, but a pretty crazy story that we're going to highlight. But overall, do you think that Ballard will address one or all of these positions? Do you think that there's one that sticks out the most that you must, if you absolutely have to have competition? What are your thoughts just on this whole subject?
I think quarterback is the one that he's kind of made it the most obvious that he's looking to address. And I think just by necessity, you have to. You're not bringing back Joe Flacco, who's not under contract. Sam Ellinger's not under contract. They'll have Jason Bean on the roster and Anthony Richardson, and you're not going to roll into training camp with that. So I think inevitably they have to bring in another body. And he mentioned grabbing somebody to compete because he's the number one issue that he talked about with Richardson is he can't trust him to play all 17 games. So they're gonna be bringing in a quarterback. You said don't draft a quarterback. I think maybe that'd be the high IQ move for Ballard. If you bench Anthony Richardson halfway through the year and a second or third round quarterback comes in and looks promising, maybe that buys you another year to
Oh
develop
man.
that new quarterback. Not what Colts fans want to hear, but maybe if you're trying to extend your life as long as possible, you take another shot there. But yeah, they're going to be adding competition at quarterback for sure.
Very fair, very fair. Well, hey, we got about 8 minutes, 10 minutes. If we run a little over, as everyone knows on this show, that's never been something that we shy away from. Just a little bit over, but so we're going to get to the latest Colts news and rumors. There's 7 subjects here to talk about. I'm going to save the crazy thing for last. But the first thing here is that the Colts request defensive coordinator, an interview with defensive coordinator, veteran coordinator, current Michigan Wolverines defensive coordinator Wink Martindale. They also interviewed on Wednesday Lou Anarumo, so they interviewed him today. What are your thoughts on these two? I know that they've also had Steve Wilkes. They've shown interest in Steve Wilkes, Dennis Allen, Ephraim Banda. You're going to hear more names, people, because like Shane Steichen, when they were searching for their coach, they're probably not going to leave any stone unturned. They're probably going to interview everybody with a pulse that they feel like is a fit. What are your thoughts on these two here? I think they're two fantastic coordinators that bring something completely different to a defense.
Yeah, I think Anarumo would be my number one there. And
I
I
like it.
I don't see the odds of that happening very high. I think we talked last week about just kind of how I see the hiring process. They're probably going for somebody who's going to get a little bit less guaranteed money up front and contract security, just because of the situation that the front office and the coaching staff is in when they signed that contract. Wink Martindale, I'm sure Ballard was happy to bring him back in for an interview after interviewing him for the head coach position back in 2022 when Shane Steichen came on. I bet he was pushing to get that interview through the door just so he could have the opportunity to pick his brain again. Um, I think they'd both be good candidates. I think Wink Martindale's kind of that 180 from what you had with Gus Bradley, where he's going to be the more aggressive kind of guy. So that would represent really a tonal shift in the defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about two completely different. You're talking about Lou Anarumo, who's a chameleon. He's going to adjust his defenses based off of what the opponent, and actually, you could get a different defensive approach in one half as opposed to another with Lou Anarumo. Now with Wink Martindale, he coaches defense like he looks.
Yep.
Aggressive, angry, like he's a bulldog. Wink Martindale never looks like he's enjoying anything, but he definitely loves football. And I think he's a bona fide leader of men. He did some great things in Baltimore with the Ravens. But the next thing is Zaire Franklin. I know that people are like, Zaire Franklin. He did have a tackling hunger campaign. So this is a dude that works in the community. You know, he's very invested in the community. It raised $16,000. My question really about this, it's just a newser thing. But like I was going to ask, what are your thoughts on Zaire Franklin? He actually had a pretty great season. And I remember I was touting that the guy needed to get more sacks. He did. He needed to force more turnovers. He did. And it got him a Pro Bowl. What are your thoughts on Zaire Franklin? Do you think that if he can shore up the attitude and if the culture can change and if he can be a better captain, do you think he's worthy of having that C on his chest again?
Yeah, I think Colts players have always gravitated towards him, and he's kind of naturally been that outspoken guy. Coaches have always liked him. Immediate, like his story's good. Late round pick, special teams guy, elevated to part-time defensive player to starter, got the contract, all homegrown with the Colts. That's the story that you want. If you're Chris Ballard, like that's the vision of success, and that's what you want for your entire team. Been great in the community, loves Indy, made that his home. It was crazy to see how fast fans turned on him. Which I guess during the season that you had and kind of what the Colts fans have been putting up with, I'm not going to blame them for anything for turning on him like that. But yeah, I'd like to see a resurgence and kind of a repairing of his reputation within the fandom. Because I think he did have a good year. I think if you shore up some things in the past game, just kind of understand that he's going to be more of that run defending linebacker, kind of understand that's his role, then I think with those expectations, you'll learn to love him again.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, man, I think that if Zaire Franklin was off of this team, you would see it. You'd see it on the field. You'd absolutely see it on the field. Okay. And if you get a guy like Wink Martindale, guess who's really good at blitzing? Zaire Franklin. So this one was one that flew completely under the radar, and I didn't even notice it until I wrote about it late at night. Former Colts running back Evan Hall signs a future reserve contract with the Steelers. This one stings because I was so pumped about Evan Hall. He was probably the best pass catching back out of the 2022 season. Played great at Northwestern, couldn't stay healthy with the Colts, gets hurt in his first game. Then he gets buried in the depth chart by Tyler Goodson, who was basically his equal, but outplayed him. I think that the Steelers are getting themselves a hell of a pass blocker. I mean, I've seen Evan Hall on tape put dudes on their ass when he blocks them. So do you think that this is going to be something where the Colts are like regretting letting Evan Hall go? Or do you think that Evan Hall probably is more of just a depth piece? Do you think that this is really going to hurt the Colts in the long run?
I don't necessarily think it's going to hurt the Colts in the long run. The Colts were desperate for an RB2 to step up this year, and he stayed on the practice squad, which I think tells you what the offensive staff thought of what Evan Hall could bring. I think, yeah, he had a lot of promise when he came in out of Northwestern, but it just never happened in Indy, and I don't think it was going to. So hopefully he can turn it around in Pittsburgh and have a nice career there.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where sometimes the league, it's unforgiving. It's a very unforgiving league, and nobody really apologizes for letting you go, even if you have success elsewhere. So a couple other things here before we close out. The Colts host the first ever game in Berlin, Germany. They've been selected to do this. It's their second game because they beat the Patriots 10-6 in Frankfurt in 2023. I think that this is awesome. It's really cool to be able to, go over to Germany, go over the pond and actually play some games. And also it's going to be an AM start for Indiana Colts fans. So this is pretty exciting. And, I think that the Colts are starting to become a team that the NFL is going to view like, hey, you know what, you've got some fans overseas. So this might be something that starts happening more for Indianapolis in years to come.
Yeah. Jim Irsay's big on growing the game internationally. I think he wants to be on the forefront of that. I'm not surprised it happened. I didn't expect it to be a home game. I'm kind of glad they went with that. I know season ticket holders and things like that, there's a big debate on lowering the price because they're losing a home game there. I don't know enough. Right. I've never been a season ticket holder. I'm not going to argue about whether people should be upset that they're getting less for their money. I think they have every right to be upset about that. But I think it's cool that the Colts are trying to grow the game internationally and grow that fan base there. Have Bjorn Warner bang the anvil over there in Germany.
There you go. There you go. So then the next thing is the Colts signed tackle, massive, 6'8" tall, 300 plus pounds, Tenuta to a future reserve contract. This is a guy who played for the Packers. He's got 3 games of experience now. This is purely for depth. You've already got Matt Gonsalves, Blake Freeland. You've got those guys on the outside. So I don't really foresee Tenuta doing much. But you know what? This is just another thing that you have to do. You have to have practice squad guys. You have to have guys on those future reserve contracts to continue going. But we're gonna get right to the end here. So, former Colts offensive lineman Dan Skipper came out and mentioned something about when he was released from the team. All right, now this was from Kaylin. I think it's Kaylin Kaler. She wrote about Dan Skipper and took some quotes, and this is from James Boyd's tweets of the
Okay.
Athletic. So the
One
credit has
second
to go to Kate.
before you start
Yeah,
this,
go,
I have not seen this at all. So this is gonna be my reaction. When was this out? This come out
okay. So
today?
this came out today. In fact,
I've
one
had
of
my
our
head
guys
down
on
in work all day, so I'm ready to hear this for the first time.
one of our guys is going to be writing about this for the channel. But this is from Dan Skipper, and this is actually an excerpt from the article itself from Kalen Kaler. So 6 times in his career, he'd gotten the call during camp to come in and see the general manager or head coach or both to get the bad news, which means you're cut, you're off the team. But Skipper says the way the Colts handled it last season was, quote, really stung. Instead of hearing it from head coach Shane Steichen or general manager Chris Ballard, Skipper says a pro personnel guy did it. Quote, if you're going to fire me, at least be a man, or at least be man enough to have the head man fire me, he said. So if that rings true, that is pathetic. If that rings true, if that's actual fact, and you have to think this is a guy who's been cut a lot. It's not like this happened to him for the first
Yeah.
time. When Dan Skipper joined the Colts, he'd been with the Lions, he'd been with other teams, he'd done it all. But my goodness, man, that's crazy. That's crazy. And we talk about Shane Steichen being bad with the media. We talk about Shane Steichen saying that Anthony Richardson is experiencing some soreness when he's got a back
Yeah.
spasm and he's crawling around on all fours in his house. This isn't a good look. This is not a good look. I hope that there's a degree of it that's not true. I would again find it hard to believe that it isn't from a guy who's been cut multiple times. So after hearing that for the first time, what's your gut reaction, Noah?
Um, I'm just trying to think if I have really any knowledge on the inner workings of how cuts go. He was here for a month in preseason or in training camp, correct? Last season,
He was here
2023.
very
Yeah.
short tenure with the Colts, made almost no impact.
I would be curious to know how the Colts have handled that in the past and how other teams have handled that in the past. And when they say a pro personnel guy, is that Morocco Brown, Ed Dodds, or these the two really high ranking people in the Colts front office? I don't think I'd consider it a slight to be fired by the assistant general manager. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility if Ed Dodds was the guy that did it. Um, yeah, not a good look. Obviously, not good for optics either way. But yeah, I think maybe it's being made more than it is, or maybe it sucks. Maybe that was a terrible way to handle it. Also, I don't really have an opinion either way.
Regardless, you're hoping that there's a degree of non-truth to it. But if this is the truth, and if it isn't, your Ed Dodds or your Morocco Brown, and it's just some dude who walked up to Dan Skipper, by the way, 6'10",
Yeah,
have fun telling that guy he's cut. That's not how you should handle a cut. You should handle a cut or a release from your head coach or your general manager. That's just how it really should be done. But I agree with you, Noah. I think that there needs to be, I love that word you said, there needs to be some optics, some context added to this, because this is just a set of words from an article. You know
yeah,
what I mean? But at the end of the day, we'll see, because this franchise is absolutely at a crossroads, probably
yeah.
the biggest it's been in years. So that's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Noah, I don't know about you. I'm excited for free agency. I'm excited to see what the Colts do with defensive coordinator. I'm even more so excited to see who we look at the Senior Bowl. Who do we see them draft? This is going to be awesome. It's going to be an awesome offseason, but my goodness, it's probably, paramount importance to
Yep.
nail everything that you're about to do here.
year 9. Let's do it. Yeah, I'm ready to run it back and see what changes this offseason.
Yeah, well, that's our show. Thank you so much for joining. Please go follow us. As the ticker says, go follow us on Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. That's where all of our written work is. We're also on the Horseshoe Huddle on YouTube. If you want to go follow us on X, I'm at D. Walster Drake. Noah Gebert, very simple. It's at Noah Gebert. And we're going to be bringing everything back to you here on Monday night, again, live. And we're not going to stop throughout the offseason. We're going to be bringing it to you even during the dog days. So really appreciate it, Colts fans. Thank you so much. And you know what? Hang in there. Hang in there. I know Chris Ballard's the general manager. I know Anthony Richardson's a little bit up and down, and his future's a little bit ambiguous. And, you're looking for all these free agent signings and these draft picks to get nailed. Still got 3 months till the draft. You have a long time before all that happens. So until then, please enjoy your week, enjoy your weekend, and join us back here again on Monday night, where we will bring you all of the Colts content that you could possibly take. Thank you so much. We'll be seeing you then.
Thank you, guys.